Today, I am joined by Ray McDiarmid, who has a wealth of experience in the BPO industry, specifically travel. Great conversation with Ray, really looking at how the BPO industry is changing, the challenges they face from the advent of technology, touching some elements around where we're going in the future, as the Ray talked about the renaissance of voice and the lesser spotted voice uh, voice message coming to fruition in the next few years. Great chat with Ray. Hope you enjoy the listen. Ray McDiarmid, good afternoon. Welcome to the Syndeo Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet. We haven't met before, but we have a mutual friend, and Paula Garcia Kennedy, who is well known in the industry. So Paula kindly introduced you to us and said you have to chat to Ray because he's a wealth of knowledge. So here we are today. We had a little bit of banter off air there. I'm not going to describe to our listeners what you're wearing,
no.
what stage your arm is, just in case it puts anybody off. But anyway, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very well, thank you, and very much looking forward to the conversation.
Super. So, Ray, give us a little bit of background to yourself. You've been in the CX industry. I know you've been through various sectors, particularly travel, hospitality. Yeah. You've seen it, and we'll touch on a bit of this, but you've seen it from multiple sides, including more laterally from the investment, PE, private equity side. So I'd like to get really an understanding of your background, first of all, and then we'll delve into some of the CX aspects of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, by all means. So I kind of grew up in BPO and had 2 or 3 moves. Started with a small challenger brand called Inkfish, which was ultimately bought by Domestic and General. And it was quite maverick. The biggest contact center we had was down in Brighton. And again, not for the sake of being anti-establishment, but we were just the young upstarts and, in some ways had no right to compete for the work that we ended up winning. Each year we would double the size of the organization with brands like British Airways, which was my first kind of foray into the travel sector, and then kind of moved from there into the establishment. So worked with Sitel, which is where I met with our mutual friend Paula Garcia Kennedy, and then joined Vertex just on the cusp of Capita, bringing Vertex and Ventura together. And then in 2015, I just grew a little frustrated by the industry and some of the misplaced claims of innovation. And at that time, I'd become very curious about how much more we could do with data, particularly in the travel industry. So I started to think about doing my own thing back then, but had a chance introduction to a couple of guys in Dublin who had just taken investment from Enterprise Ireland to build a customer data platform. And when I think about the prospect of me trying to do that on my own, it would never have worked. What I did have was a reasonably effective go-to-market and an ability to proactively take a proposition to market, but would never have been able to build that. But what the guys at Box Ever had done was put together a really smart team of data scientists and maths and stats people that could actually build the models. So stepped out of BPO into a scale up. We grew that to market leader position in the airline industry and essentially became the ability to collect and connect real-time data and build decisioning strategies for the likes of Emirates and Air New Zealand and Jetstar and various airlines around the world. And then joined Capgemini to build their travel and hospitality practice. So, and again, what I found at Capgemini was almost a little bit like finishing school, a bunch of phenomenal people and a great culture. And then I stepped back into the BPO industry. So I moved across from the UK to Miami, took on the chief commercial officer role, running go-to-market and sales and bid management and various other things for Sitel. And then after a couple of years came back and set my own go-to-market advisory business, which, as you correctly say, is kind of not necessarily not necessarily turned into what I thought it would, but most of what we do now is working with private equity firms with BPO or CX assets under management that are looking to augment the proposition. So pretty varied, but always with a real curiosity about customer experience, which I guess is probably why we're talking, Oliver.
It's a big part of it, yes, and how that, I guess, is evolving. You made an interesting comment there at the outset about being with one of the, I suppose, I get the word you actually use, the upstarts in the BPO industry, and that paints the BPO industry, I guess, many of us would feel as sort of laggard, not innovative. And interesting, you mentioned Paula. This was part of the conversation I had with Paula back a number of months ago in one of the episodes. How do you think, or we'll delve into the CX, but how do you think that BPO industry is adapting to some of the new technology that's coming along, particularly like the Gen AI,
Yeah.
Will it sound some people are saying this could be the death knell of BPOs, others are saying this will reinvent BPOs. What's your own kind of view of having had a reasonably good insight into the BPO world?
Yeah, and I would never want to bite the hand that feeds me. I left the industry in 2015 because I felt the BPO industry was kind of masquerading as delivering end-to-end customer experience and was awash with innovation. And actually the reality was, and to a certain extent still is, that contact center operations are, in my view at least, a relatively narrow slice of an end-to-end customer experience. And I think in the main where the BPOs really deliver their value, sadly, is in the lower to medium value, lower to medium complexity, kind of highly repeatable tasks or interactions. So you ask about, almost this existential threat that comes from Gen AI, or is it an opportunity? And I don't think we fully know the answer to that yet. My perspective is I don't know that the reason organizations outsource to a BPO, I don't know if that's the same set of demand or requirements that they've got around the opportunity to stand up new capabilities. I often talk about, stating the obvious, but every brand has a P&L. And actually the contact center outsourcing cost line, for as long as I can remember, has sat in the L. It's a loss, it's a liability. Yeah. We desperately want it to be strategic, but actually in most cases, the majority of it is transactional, it's tactical. The main levers that are expected to be pulled are labor arbitrage, which explains why, we're constantly trying to get more out of our people for less. It explains maybe the trend towards nearshore and offshore. And actually, I think this new set of capability, this new opportunity that's represented by Gen AI and large language models, I think it's a different set of stakeholders. And I sat on the senior leadership team of a tier one BPO, but we really didn't have many relationships with the CIO, the CTO, the chief digital officer, the chief marketing officer. We tended to exist in a kind of cohort that might be customer service operations, vendor management, procurement. And actually those guys and girls do a brilliant job, but it's predominantly focused on driving a set of transactional outcomes. The KPIs that infer whether you're good, bad, or indifferent tend to be AHT and first contact resolution. And actually the business that I run, which is a go-to-market advisory firm, is looking at how do these organizations successfully innovate and diversify, but then how do they connect that to a new set of stakeholders? How do they proactively build intimacy and credibility with the people that do have the authority and autonomy to either envision a future that isn't reliant on people in contact centers, but also have the authority and autonomy to make investment decisions. And I think the jury's still out. I think BPOs have an opportunity. I think in certain quarters, there is something of a trust deficit in terms of how well they deliver their core business, which is, on the the transactional element. So I think there's an opportunity, but I don't know that BPOs are best placed to fully exploit that, if I'm being very honest.
And, expanding upon that, and I've often thought about this, and I've thought about, the customer contact model being, I would think it's fundamentally broken, because at one level, and this is not from a tech, but from an organizational perspective, you're putting basically your lowest cost resource, usually contact center agents with the least training and the least knowledge of your product and service, in front of your highest value assets, your customers, which is true for most organizations. But most organizations do treat the contact center, as you say, as the L side of a P&L, and it's a cost center. And therefore, it's very hard for a BPO as a third-party provider to actually break that psyche, because you're basically measured on one thing, which is usually something like containment or AHT, or cost per seat or cost per agent, whatever that is. But it's always a cost. Well, not always, but by and large, most organizations are in that psyche of it's a cost-driven model, as opposed to thinking CX should be part of. And you read all of these mission statements, and you look online at these large organizations, and they talk about CX being a core part of their ethos and their values, but rarely, and maybe I'm looking in the wrong places, but rarely do you see it in action. And again, I mean, what's your thoughts around that? Do you think the organization will break out of that psyche, and why are they not breaking out of that psyche?
My hope, I'll look at this from two dimensions. One, from the brands that we're supporting as an industry. And I look at product development, and I look at an organization's product roadmap or a new market entrant. And I worry at what point in the development of new products if a customer has the audacity to even be able to find our phone number, make sure you get them off the phone as quickly as you can, because you can hit an AHT target. So I think in some ways that is a consequence of where we enter the conversation. If we were to enter the conversation at the design phase, and if we were to have a legitimate contribution to designing rather than just operationalizing that residual part of the contact mix, I think we'd have a much more value-based conversation. My hope for the industry, and I do see pockets of examples of this, is that we will successfully automate the very low value, low complexity, highly repeatable tasks, which by definition means the residual contact will be higher value, higher complexity,
and more expensive,
and hopefully more expensive. So we can break that link with lowest unit-based cost on a time and materials calculation is always a good thing. I would hope that by removing some of the overhead around that very transactional volume, the BPOs, and I do see it, there are BPOs, not always, unfortunately, the tier one BPOs, because I think they've become so ingrained and conditioned to deliver the appropriate combination of onshore, nearshore, offshore, but always with a line item around the overarching cost base is getting progressively lower. I see maybe the more mid-market providers arguably not working with the tier one brands. So when I think of the needs of an Amazon, or I think of the needs of an Uber, for example, they have design people, they have UX people. Really, they look to the BPO market to operationalize their processes, invariably on their technology, and you really become a body shop. I think the mid-market, by looking at tier two brands, where maybe CX is core, but they don't have quite the talent pool around what good looks like, I do think there's an opportunity to kind of break that stranglehold.
And
though, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Those, I think we're at a really interesting point in. I was reading something from First Source, and they talk about tech plus ops, and I think we're at a really interesting point around technology as an enabler for human capital, and there's nothing new about that. But if you look at the emergence, and we're probably only 1 or 2 cycles of development and adoption away in terms of translation capabilities, both text and voice, the traditional competitive advantage that the tier 1 BPOs have, which is hundreds of sites across any conceivable configuration of onshore, nearshore, offshore for all of the developed markets. Historically, I think that's been a source of competitive advantage. I wonder if that's about, in a kind of location-less operating model, I wonder actually if that's about to flip to becoming a source of competitive disadvantage. If we can consolidate into a smaller number of strategic delivery markets using translation software to deliver an authentic set of outcomes, actually the cost base of the tier 1s becomes pretty challenging, relative to a mid-market provider.
Yeah, and yes, obviously their model then does get significantly challenged in terms of, and this is where, the likes of Gen AI and that type of technology is probably seen as a threat, but I suppose whether they can take that technology and embrace it into their offering, and I suppose commercialize it from their perspective to give, added value in terms of the CX. But I think you're right that, they're highly repeatable in transactions. Most organizations are doing that themselves without probably the near BPO. So if that's what the BPO is doing, then they are in difficulty already. So it's about balancing those more high value transactions with the use of technology that can't simply be automated.
Yeah, and I think, again, I keep referring to the tier 1 BPOs in the mid-market. Those organizations that require the services of a tier 1, invariably multiple locations, different languages, different jurisdictions from a data perspective. The brands that are using those businesses often work in a multi-vendor operating environment. So, they will maintain the integrity of why they outsource by moving their share of outsourcing wallet around based on the previous quarter or the quarter before that's quality. And by quality, it's, did you manage to hit your fill rates? Was your attrition at an acceptable level? And then you've got the in-call kind of set of KPIs. So if I'm working with 3 or 4 or 5 different vendors, it's going to take something special for me to work with just one of them to stand up that orchestration layer. And actually, that's where I think arguably the trend is towards the mid-market, where actually they may not have the resources or the budget to manage a portfolio of BPOs, so they will consolidate to one. And actually, when you've got the majority share of wallet, arguably you can get into a much more strategic conversation around experimentation and different funding models, etc. But yeah, the idea that if I'm working with 3 or 4 of the largest providers, the idea that I will take all of this richness of opportunity presented by Gen AI from just one of them and trust them to be the orchestration layer between my end customers and 3 of their competitors, I don't know. I haven't seen many examples of that just yet.
Let's delve a little bit more into the CX space itself. So you've been involved in the hospitality, and you mentioned the airlines, travel industry. I mean, that's an industry that's notoriously hard, I guess, to get CX correct. And something hit me recently, and there's I'm on the fence in this piece. If we take some of the budget airlines, let's take the probably one of the most well-known ones, Ryanair. Some people will argue their CX is horrible. Okay, Other people, and I'm in the other people camp, I take the view that their CX is actually one of the best out there, because they offer a promise to get me from A to B at a certain cost, and they are some hidden costs, but when you read it, you kind of know what you're paying for, you know what you're getting, typically get there on time. So I think their CX is extremely good. But I suppose the point I'm coming to, most people think about CX only when something goes wrong as the escalation point. And that happens all the time. And yes, that's important. But people forget about CX when you constantly do whatever your product or service is, sell or deliver that product or service at a constantly, high experience. And it doesn't have to be, if I continue with the airline industry, it doesn't have to be what BA used to do, back in the day, and, offer you free drinks and, a cup of coffee every time you got on a half an hour flight. And people assume that was good CX. I actually don't think it really was. I think, to me, the Ryanair approach, I don't know what your thoughts are around that and what you've seen in that industry in particular.
Yeah, so many thoughts, and you've hit on the thing I'm probably most passionate about, which is the opportunity for customer experience within the travel industry. So I think you're right, and I probably fall on the side of the fence that you do. I think the low-cost airlines, as they were previously referred to, I think they do a great job. I don't think they masquerade as anything other than what they are. Now, I believe they are competing primarily on price, but they are also competing on an appropriate level of service, potentially from a relatively low expectation. And that's a big thing for us to consider. But actually, historically, they were competing on price and delivering an appropriate service. I think the full service carriers were not competing on price. They were going to be more expensive. But I think as great service, affordable fares becomes ubiquitous in the industry, they need to look at what is going to renew loyalty, what is going to drive propensity to repeat purchase with an airline in the future. And right now, I think there are so many missed opportunities. We look at some airlines never admit to losing bags. They call it short-shipped bags. It's not that we've lost it. We know exactly where it is because there's a system of record somewhere that tells us it just happens.
It's just that you, the passenger, can't find it. It's not our fault. It's your fault, really. You lost it, not us.
I despair at how backwards some of the processes have been allowed to kind of remain. So we subject this poor passenger who is maybe traveling all day or traveling with his or her family, and we subject them to that kind of diminishing number of people at the carousel, whereas actually there's a real opportunity to do that differently. I have to know that your bag isn't on the plane. That's a legal requirement of the airline. I look at connected cabins, the proliferation of Wi-Fi and connected devices or connected in-flight entertainment, and the opportunity for that to become a two-way interaction channel, not just for service recovery, but for sales. It's a great opportunity you're flying to New York, and actually the weather's changed. It's pouring with rain. Do you now want an Uber to Manhattan, or are you going to continue to take the subway? But equally, when things go wrong, and actually the way that it's been allowed to continue is I stand at the carousel, I get more and more agitated because there's 3 bags left, there's 2 bags left, there's actually no bags coming through. So I make a beeline for the first person that looks like they might be in a position to help me based on the uniform they're wearing. As we talked about briefly, I broke my wrist 4 weeks ago and wasn't able to travel. So I was meant to be taking my children to Munich to see the Adele concert. They're old enough, so they still went. And I was meant to be going on holiday. Now, because of the job I did coming back and forwards from Miami recently, I was top tier status with British Airways, and I'm not calling them out specifically, but this is kind of endemic of the industry. So I wanted to do a name change. So I rang the BA top gold hotline. I explained what had happened, and I wanted my eldest daughter to go on holiday in my place. I couldn't even do a name change. You know, in what world is that okay? And listen, the airline industry is all about eligibility. You're eligible to enter the lounge or you're not. You're eligible for a free drink or you're not. But even at that level of perceived loyalty to an airline, I couldn't just change a name in the most kind of desperate of circumstances, as in I can't fly. Had I booked a holiday, so it was flight plus hotel, I could have done that. In what way is that okay in 2024 for an industry that's fighting to deliver customer experience differentiation?
Yeah, it reminds me, I don't know if you heard of the story of a Canadian musician, Dave Carroll, United Breaks Guitar. Do you know if you heard that story? No. You should listen to it at some point. It's an old one. I was back 2000 or something. But he's a musician. He had a quite expensive, I think he's traveling. I'm recalling this all now from Chicago, where he's quite an expensive guitar, and they
I do know the story. Sorry, I didn't know the name of the guitar.
They chucked it off the luggage handler or something and smashed the guitar. And anyway, he wrote the Trank compensation. So he ended up writing a story about it. And the fact this is, pre-X Twitter or whatever, it actually did go viral, such as it was then. So I think they ended up, I don't know, they ended up paying him money, but it cost them an awful lot, both in damaged reputation or brand reputation. Just because of their poor experience he had with trying to get a remedy for his broken guitar.
You mentioned United, and actually they're doing some really interesting things. So they have started to install CX kiosks at really important points of the physical journey for travelers. So at those points of dissatisfaction, so where you've got mass passenger congregating and a flight is cancelled, and inevitably then what happens is you get a queue forming, so a human queue, largely regardless of whether you're boarding group 1, 2, or 3. It's who gets in the queue, and maybe 200 people ask exactly the same question. So that's creating a bottleneck in the airport. It's placing unfair CX tension and overhead on the airport staff. So what they've started to do is deploy these kiosks that allows an individual to have either a video conversation. Inevitably, you've got different nationalities traveling. So actually, I can initiate a messaging chat session, which is instantly translated from largely any language globally for an agent who is capable of delivering the right resolution and outcome. It's got a QR code that you can scan with your device, and you can seamlessly move that interaction from the kiosk onto your phone if you want to move on to the next point in the journey. And I kind of applaud them for that, because they call it their agent on demand. And there are so many levers of value that they're pulling there, not least access to real-time support, access to the right resolution with people that do have the real-time context of, you and your trip and your reason for travel, and who else is on your PNR. So, there are pockets of innovation. And then I look at, these 2- and 3-sided marketplaces, the Airbnbs, for example. Actually, they do a really good job when things go wrong. In the design of their product, which is largely digitally native, perhaps we call it, in a way that airlines aren't. And it's not for the want of trying for airlines. Very often their back-end systems prevent them from doing the right thing in the moment. But you look at companies like Airbnb, where they've eliminated a lot of the waste, the process waste and the information gaps. Or an Uber, we take it for granted now that you can see in real time how far your Uber is from you. The retail industry has done a good job, and there's lots of silos in the retail industry, particularly in e-commerce, where it might be a retail brand you're engaging with. It may be then a 3PL logistics organization that are doing the pick and pack. It may actually be a different courier that does the forward logistics and then a different process for the reverse logistics. Yeah. And I think they've done a good job. The travel industry, I think the long-term aim is actually how do we arbitrate between the different kind of constituent parts? So you buy your flight. I always think of the airline as the alpha or the primary, and then there's lots of ancillaries that sit around that. So your journey to the airport may well be with a different provider. Your passage through the airport will be with the airport provider and then maybe handed off to a Swiss port or someone like that. You then get to your destination and you may use an Uber to get to a third-party hotel. So I think the long-term opportunity is that someone is going to step up and deliver enough value in the ecosystem to win the hearts and minds of the traveller. I think the short-term imperative is, you as the airline, you have to deliver almost the gold standard of the exemplary support and service for the elements of the journey that you do directly control. Yeah. Otherwise, someone else is going to come in and almost relegate the airline to being very little much more than a human cargo or human courier. And someone else is going to generate that richness of CX all the way around the end-to-end journey. I think that's the opportunity, but I think it's still baby steps.
Well, to deliver on it. And I think that point you made about United and those kiosks, because a massive, regardless of what the industry is, a massive issue typically with CX is poor communication or lack of communication. So to me, that actually, I haven't come across that yet, and I will actually the next time I'm going to an airport in the States, just go and explore. Because the big frustration is in with delayed flights, whatever, lack of communication, what's happening, when is it, and that leads to that. But they've obviously sat back and tried to look at CX from a what is the problem for the customer, what we want to solve, as opposed to what piece of technology or gadget or what do we want to try and do. And I think you mentioned retail there as well. Yes, obviously. I think retail in particular has challenges, particularly combining that physical and digital. And I was having a conversation with Chris Gillen, who's a CX expert really in the retail space a few months back. And one of the things I, often find in a physical store, you go in and sometimes, whether it's size or whatever, and yes, I have problems getting the right size, believe it or not.
Surely not.
Yeah. Well, I could eat less and run more, but I don't. That'll be my next New Year's resolution whenever that comes around.
Wait till after Christmas, given it's only September.
Oh, I can't wait. It'll last all of 2 days. But you go into a store and you're looking for, and they go, well, we don't have that, but you can get it online, and my analogy to Chris was like, that's like the IVR version of, why are you phoning us today? You can actually go onto our website. And I'm thinking, well, I'm in the store. I knew you have a website. I chose not to go onto your website. I chose to come into the store for a reason. So therefore, I would like to be served in the store. And the same analogy when we often hit an IVR and it's deflection from voice to digital, which is, do you know you could do this all on the app, or you can go onto our website and do it. Yes, I do know that because I'm not stupid, but I've chosen to ring you for a reason. Therefore, Absolutely. I would like you to engage me over that channel.
I think there's a real opportunity again. We often talk in CX about the single customer view and the customer 360, and if we're honest, that is primarily made up of your digital behaviors. If you're in a logged in state, the investment that's gone into the digital channels and the product recommendations, and I understand your preferences and your size. And by the way, I think you look great, Oliver. I see we're both rocking the
thanks the
three-quarter zip knitwear. But I look at the opportunity for them to truly join up the bricks and mortar real estate with the digital and maybe the app. And, we've started to see, would you like me to email you your receipt? And I think, yes, of course, we're saving paper at that time. But actually, what I also get from you is your email address. So I can start to augment what you're doing in the physical retail store with what you're doing on the website. And I think every industry's still got so many untapped areas to exploit. And in my one hope for things like Gen AI, if we can move beyond that kind of hype cycle that we saw 3 years ago, everyone was talking about the metaverse, and that was going to fundamentally change how brands engage with their customers, and it was going to become much more immersive. My hope is actually we can eliminate the waste, and we can at least reinvest some of that saving, if that's how it materializes, into doing better by the customer. You mentioned earlier, rather than working forwards from the technology and the capability, which inevitably it's never been better than it is today, but I still don't see paradigm shift in the way that we engage customers, particularly, as you said earlier, when things go wrong.
No, we haven't, and I've been around this industry long enough, not quite since the 1970s, but it really hasn't changed since the 1970s. In we've had technology evolutions, and we've moved away from copper and HDD switches to digital and gate, but the kind of model is still the same, really. It hasn't changed. I hope I live long enough, and I hope I'm still involved. Maybe I'll be retired, that it actually does change to something a little bit more engaging of the customer.
Yeah, and despite, we probably got 3 or 4 minutes in without talking about Gen AI, but it's inevitable that we have to, and things like co-pilots and what are the use cases? Fundamentally, over the last 2 years, let's say it, there actually hasn't been any drop-off or demand for traditional CX. And by that, I mean contact center support. Headcount is where it has been for a long time relative to the amount of customers, the propensity to call or propensity to chat. I ran I think they labeled it as a think tank, but a kind of fireside chat with 10 or 12 customer service leaders in New York recently. And that was all around trying to project 2 years forward from that point. I think it was back in May. So, suspend reality. Let's pretend we're at May 2026, just as a show of hands around the table. Where do you think you'll be from a headcount perspective in contact centers relative to today? And I fully expected the answer to be, a 30% reduction. The most popular answer, and it was pretty unscientific, it was just a show of hands. The most popular answer was, we don't know. I think the customer service element of customer experience is still waiting to be informed or educated in terms of how to deploy, adopt, and scale this technology.
Yeah.
And sadly, in many cases, it's actually still just cheaper to take the call. Which arguably doesn't serve the best interests of the customer, who would rather you eliminate that problem at the source, like your example of walking into a retail organization.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. And I was chatting to someone recently, and I can't remember who it was now, but they coined the term the fear of missing out and the fear of moving forward at a lot of these organizations. So it's like a double-edged sword. They feel they want to do something, they feel there's value there. They actually don't know what to do, and they don't know how to take advantage of it. And I think while the technology is definitely evolving and changing, you also find, and you probably find this maybe with those executives you were doing that think tank with, they've invariably over the last 10 or 15 years gone through transformation. Be that move to a BPO, in-source, outsource, near-source, technology refresh, whatever. So a lot of them are scratching their heads and going, typically these projects have taken a long time, cost a lot of dollars, so therefore I'm not going to dive in at this stage unless I have some degree of certainty, I guess, about what my outcomes might be.
Yeah, but I think you're also right in terms of that fear of missing out. We look at those first generation bots and you had to have one because everyone had one.
Yeah.
The reality is, very few organizations had institutionalized knowledge to such an extent that the bot was helpful, but it was there. And actually, it became a source of frustration and dissatisfaction. It became difficult to jump out of the bot in a way that maintained where I'd got to at the point that it failed. But actually, if you didn't have one, you were starting to kind of undermine the brand. And so, I think fear of missing out and being seen to be doing something, whether it's novel or meaningful, I think is also a problem.
Yeah, no, I think that is probably becoming less, but still very pervasive, certainly within the enterprise, that FOMO, but also fear of how to start. And I know more recently, or not maybe more recently, but you're also involved, if I say the other side of the coin, from the investor side of the coin, private equity. What sort of indication are you getting from that aspect of Gen AI, how it's evolving? Is it hype, or is it sort of overinflated? Has it hit the peak, back down, going up? Where do you think we're at, or where do PE think it's at?
So there's a few different things to look at here. I think if you look at how the debt is trading in some of the tier one BPOs as low as 65, 70 cents in the dollar.
The dollar, yeah.
Certainly the financial institutions do believe that there is an existential threat. I think if you look the other side from a BPO perspective, I think most organizations have a revenue diversification target that says, we need to future-proof our business by having at least a 30-40% ratio of non-FTE based value that we're delivering to clients. But I don't think many of them have achieved that ratio yet. I think we've seen a lot of consolidation in the industry. So the Sitel and Sykes, you look at TP and Major L, you look at Concentrix and Webhelp. And largely that's been more of the same. I think if you look at the mid-market, some of the privately owned businesses who might be thinking now is the right time to consider either merging or some sort of liquidity event like IPO or bringing in third-party investment, it's actually a really challenging time. As an industry, we kind of flourished through the pandemic, and clearly it's not a great thing to call out because so many people struggled and so many people lost their livelihoods. But the BPO industry actually came out of the pandemic in pretty good shape. Top line grew, profitability grew. Then the trading conditions through 22 and 23 were challenging. They were very difficult. So EBITDA was depressed and arguably still is. The EBITDA in the main is kind of nudging 12, 13% at the same time that multiples are down at 4.5, 5x. So, whether now is the right time to trade, I don't know. There's a lot of optimism that BPOs can successfully pivot and stand up more value add from the technologies that we've talked about and diversification of their product set and those sorts of things. Again, I still think the jury is out. So private equity firms, there is pent up demand in PE, particularly those that have got BPO assets under management today, whether it's the right time for founders to sell who probably created or had a preset of the valuation of their business informed as they came out of the pandemic. Top line was up and multiples were still up at 8, 9, 10. EBITDA was healthy. Actually, if you look at it now, it's a really challenging time.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably reflected as well in some of the tech vendors in that space. And if I look at Zoom, which we're actively using at the moment, I think their valuation has fallen something like 80% since the pandemic. So it's not just the BPOs, it's the tech vendors. And I suppose not only have you the fall from obviously a natural fall off from the pandemic in terms of usage and the newness of it, but you now have got Gen AI thrown into the mix, and there's a whole degree of what the business model might look like. Do we need to revamp our products or services? There's certainly a lot in the mix that I think it'll take a year or two for most of those organizations to take it out, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. And there are some brilliant examples of businesses that have pivoted, of businesses that are delivering value. I won't name them. I work with a number of BPOs doing some advisory work around go-to-market and, how do you adapt your product market fit and your message market fit? How do you build intimacy with a different set of stakeholders? So the opportunity is there, but inevitably there will continue to be winners and losers. And I think there will continue to be a level of consolidation in the market.
And you mentioned earlier, do you see that in the BPO space, the ability to break out from the traditional stakeholders that you'd be dealing with into more maybe the technology executives, the revenue generating executives?
Yeah, I think that is hugely dependent on, and again, it's stating the obvious, but a very proactive go-to-market strategy, not one that sits and waits for that happy coincidence of an RFP drops into your inbox from someone you don't particularly know in a procurement organization. I think it's reliant on getting out there, and maybe I talk a lot about ICPs, ideal customer profiles, and maybe the BPO industry, if they're evolving their ICP, they also need to look at their ideal hiring profile. Do we need to bring more people into the BPO industry from an SI background or a consulting background? Arguably the SIs do have those relationships with the CIO, with the technology community, where the ability for an SI to operationalize the contact center in the rounds of technology innovation is maybe more straightforward than a pure play contact center operator trying to build the right kind of capabilities in and around tech. But the opportunity is there, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see. We have the consulting firms like Accenture actually actively pursuing business right the way through to delivering frontline contact center operations, but they will start their journey in the boardroom. They will start their journey around the design effort and the blueprint around CX, the 10 steps before a customer ever needs to touch a contact center. They will inform how you use technology or evolve technology. And arguably, it's those businesses that may be the biggest threat to the pure play contact center providers.
So I'm conscious we're probably up against our time window here, Ray. Last thing before we do leave, 2025, looking forward to it. Predictions other than that 2 days after the turn of the year, I'll break whatever the year resolution I had. What do you see coming down the line for 2025 or even beyond?
I see some continued false starts. I see more offshore consolidation of capability. I think location less operating models will prosper. I talked earlier about the idea that you need to have that level of geodiversity. I think we can consolidate that into a channel. I see a bit of a renaissance for voice, but I think it will be used slightly differently. So if you look at my kids are 24, 21 and 17, they don't make phone calls, they leave voice notes. And actually I think the way we use voice may well be in almost you're triaging what the customer is looking for. So I can leave a voice note for a brand. The AI model can interpret the requirements of that individual, arguably seek clarification. Did you mean this? But in a very convenient way, and then set about resolving or activating that request. So I would hope that we reframe the value, that lesser spotted voice conversation between a customer and a brand, I would hope that the insights that we are able to generate, if indeed we do move that into higher value, higher complexity, I would hope that brands would start to value the opportunity to engage in a conversation with their customers. And I would hope those insights that are generated, will be put to good use, not just in a way that drives revenue, but finally drives genuine customer centricity into the operating model.
Perfect. I love that lesser spotted voice. And the rebirth of voicemail. And another segue, we were implementing a solution like about 3 years ago, and customer did ask, well, what about voicemail and routing for voicemail and workflow for voicemail? And we're going, nah, nobody uses that anymore. Don't worry about it. But maybe we've heard it here first, Ray, that it's going to come back in vogue, and it absolutely makes sense. Ray, listen, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed the 45, 50 minutes just flowing, and that's always a good sign.
It really has.
The chat was good. Listen, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
No, my absolute pleasure. Lovely to talk to you, Oliver.
You too.